was a really sad story, and not a sad story. It's actually an affirming story, but it amazes me that people can keep their non-faith through those kinds of challenges, that they don't fall prey to that constant sort of whimpering religious talk about, God has a higher plan, you're in God's hands, and those kinds of things. That must be really hard.
It is. I was hoping that Aaron would be with us for the beginning of our conversation with Oliver. Oliver, if you just bear with me a second here, I think he's coming back. I don't understand why Aaron keeps dropping in and out of the call, but when these shows are posted on YouTube, which normally these days is done within 48 hours of the show, we'll edit out all these bad bits, and it will appear to those that didn't watch it live as if we actually had some idea what we were doing. Anyway, Oliver, slight change of topic, I think, but hit us.
So being that we don't believe in souls, we are left with a brain which adheres to certain laws, as electrochemical reactions that are going off in our brains. And now the theist would say yes, and free will is the soul, and whatever is not confined to the reaction of the soul. I mean, it's very complicated when you start to really examine this whole relationship with the soul, which is interacting with the brain, but there's somewhere in there that there's a space for freedom, even though I think just about everyone will concede that there's some measure of determinism we're chained to through our brains. But being that we don't believe in any sort of wiggle room for soul, we're left with just brains. So with that in mind, does anyone here think we have free will? Because certainly I don't.
The best way I can answer this question is to steal the answers directly from A.C. Grayling, who, when asked this, basically said we must proceed as if we do. I think it's a mildly interesting question, but I don't have an answer, nor am I particularly bothered that I don't have an answer. Concordance?
I don't know. I think that's a simple, honest answer, and I don't think that it demands to be answered. I think it's one of those questions like it's not strictly a scientific question in the strictest possible sense. So I don't know that there will ever be a really definitive answer. There are a number of processes that, for all intents and purposes, are stochastic, are non-deterministic, but they may be replayable if you played them backwards in time. If there were some way to view those events, let's say, in reverse, could you have calculated all the variables that went into that decision? Is it truly a knowable value or only knowable in principle? The decisions, as far as we can tell, that we make are influenced by factors in the environment. Are they underlying that truly free? I don't have an answer.
As for my answer, whether we have free will or not is only possible if the religious perspective that is being imposed upon us is wrong, because free will cannot exist in an environment where we have prophecies to be fulfilled. And I think it's a logical conclusion there. If you can see into the future, it means that the future is fixed. And if you can make changes to the future, then the future is not fixed and the prophecy won't come true.
And honestly, if you see this as sort of a temporal mechanics problem, if a god or gods can see the timeline not separated by events, then obviously if there were a single timeline, that would mean that, of course, we have no choice but to follow along that path. Now, we may have made choices along the way, but we're still following along that path. So I have always argued that omniscience is incompatible with free will, at least as I understand it. But it's such a unknowable quantity.
Obviously, philosophy is not our forte.
The trouble with yes, it isn't, and well, I'll say no more about that. But the trouble with your argument is, Aaron, is that God has demanded that we have free will, and it was the breaking of that free will by Adam and Eve that has doomed mankind ever since. So
no, wait. Yeah,
contradiction.
this was where they were being punished for doing something wrong, which the thing that they did that was wrong was learning the difference from right from wrong, so that the moment they could be punished for, they didn't know, or they knew right from wrong, and that's what they're being punished for, where they were supposed to not know, so of course they're going to do something wrong because they don't know any better, and that's why they're being punished for it, because they didn't know until they knew, and then it was too late. Just like where the only judgment we can make is not about our morality, but about our gullibility, whether we believed impossible nonsense for no good reason is the only reason that we would ever get into heaven. And it doesn't have anything to do with whether we were good or bad people or to what degree either way. I'm just always a little skeptic or critical on this.
I think that shows that Aaron's knowledge of the Bible is far greater than his command of philosophy. It's not any of our strong points, and if there's any philosophers watching, they're probably cringing in disbelief at how naive our arguments are. Well,
I really like Christopher Hitchens' answer to the question.
The trouble is, they're naive. I can't help it because I've got no free will.
I like Christopher Hitchens' answer to the question, which is, of course we have free will. We have no choice but to.
I think you had a supplementary question, Oliver.
Well, first I'll just add that the free will with Adam and Eve, that's before God had the omniscience. That's before he spoke of prophecies. As you'll recall in that story, he's a flesh and blood character who walks away, comes back and asks what's happened. But anyway, you said that first of all, the A.C. Grayling quote saying that we should live like we have free will. I don't agree with that, because what gives me compassion and empathy is not the idea that I can choose to be that way.
How do you know?
It just sort of
is.
How
do you know that? You have, if you don't have free will, you've got no choice in what you feel.
Yes, and I don't, for that matter. It's sort of to the degrees with which I'm selfish, and I don't put money in a charity box that I might have, or to the degrees that I do, and I feel empathy has been ingrained in me. And it's not the idea that I have freedom in my choices that would make me swing one way or another. So I disagree with that thing. As for the significance,
think that you are an automaton.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people want to talk about that the human body is like a vehicle of some sort, and that somehow you can transcend that your mind, your personality will still be what it is outside of this body. But we know for sure that all our decisions, all our moods, all our attitudes towards so many things are rooted in the synapses and the chemistry and the balances going on in our minds. We have people with severe trauma to the brain that have changes in their personality or their attitudes. I mean, and we know how chemical we are, and there's no way that you can extricate that. I know I just used the wrong word. There's no way that you can extract the mind intact from the chemistry that creates it. So I mean, no, I don't believe in free will in that I believe that we can be independent, or that we would like ascend out of our physical bodies and maintain anything that is us the way that we are, or that you could record the data in your mind and feed it into a robot and it would somehow still be you, because it's not. It's made of the chemistry that you are. We are inextricable from our physical forms, and largely our decisions and our attitudes and our aesthetics are based on a combination of our experiences and the chemistry that makes us up.
Before I come to your concordance, I just want to make this point, which I think Oliver was kind of coming to, but also has been posted by Lux. I think it Lux Dead. I can't remember. In the comments, it's gone there. But his observation was that if we don't have free will, then no one can be judged for their actions. But the problem is, if there's no free will, then we have no choice but to judge them.
Well, sure, but
concordance.
I'm feeding you this information in the hope that it will change as part of the program, it will change your point of view on it.
Well, it can't because we don't have free will. I mean,
You don't need free will for it. It can be part of the course. This is the new data I'm feeding you that gets you a new opinion onto being less judgmental. And it wasn't my point that we shouldn't
but
judge.
I've got no choice in whether I'm judgmental because I've got no free will.
Again, that doesn't matter. I'm feeding you data in the hope that it will swing you one way.
But it's all predetermined. I don't have free will to accept it or not. Concordance.
I was actually commenting on Aaron. You're talking about the difference between the brain, the mind, and the soul. I think of those as three separate concepts. And I actually do sort of believe in a mind. I think most people probably can accept that arises from the brain. That it has its roots in the organic, but it is not. You can't tear the brain apart neuron by neuron and find which ones are involved in the mind, or they each have functions, or they have functional components, but it's not until you put them all together that you have what I would call the mind. So it's an emergent property, and in science there's a real tendency, a really dangerous tendency, to become overly reductionist, to strip everything apart so that you're left with just this one little part. You cannot study the mind, the way that the mind works, looking only at the physical nature of the brain.
I did say that we were a combination of our experiences, which
yes,
definitely do have a profound effect, I grant you. But what I said was that it isn't that the mind is inextricable from the brain that creates it for the chemical balances and the influences and the injuries and the synapses involved.
Right.
Whereas religious belief does not hold to what you're talking about, emergent complexity.
Right.
Religion seems wholly fixated against emergent complexity. They wanted everything to be the other way entirely. They don't want to accept emergence can even happen.
Beautifully put.
Okay. Did we answer anyone's question?
I very much doubt it. But somebody mentioned quantum electrodynamics and the uncertainty, and what is going on in our brains obviously is subject to a certain degree of uncertainty in that regard as well. But the fact that we can't predict something or it's uncertain doesn't necessarily imply that we have free will or do not have free will. I think it's a redundant point. But there we are.
No, I agree with you that we need to be held accountable as if we have free will.
Well, of course we do. We've got no choice. Sorry.
Well, what about... Okay, so when you say accountable, because this is my other point on the ethics of not so much judging people, but punishing. I don't see a point in undue punishment, or let's say if you've quarantined someone who's a danger to the public, I'd say mitigate their circumstances, make them as comfortable as possible, but don't punish them for the sake of it, because I obviously believe that they couldn't help but do what they did, and it's not making them suffer is not going to undo anything, nor do they really deserve it, because it wasn't of their own free will that they chose to commit something, to commit a heinous action.
Well,
so when you say accountable,
we need to not have this as a yes or no question. Then whether you have free will or whether you don't, I think we need to look at the degrees of accountability. When somebody has a great deal of mental deficiency, and we've seen how many stories like this in the news recently, where people have a very tenuous attachment to reality whatsoever. I don't think anymore, and I used to believe this, but I don't think anymore that the death penalty is justifiable. But there are limits to there are appropriate punishments for various degrees of sanity, and for somebody who seems to be completely rational and capable of understanding, the reality as it is, as most people do, they should be treated as though they are fully accountable for their own actions. unless there are extenuating circumstances implying that other considerations should be made.
That's really odd to me that you'd make an exception for mental illness and other such deficiencies, because in my mind, once you acknowledge that, you're acknowledging that this is our brain as a kind of system, and just as a mental deficiency would cause someone to do a certain action, even a perfectly healthy brain would be subject to the same sort of cause and effect. So even someone who is mentally stable or doesn't have any sort of diagnosed issues, they might have been abused or punished, and that therefore they have those hateful thoughts running around their brain that sort of got them into doing what they did.
Well, let's look at it this way. The perspective that I'm coming from is that the method of punishment that we have internment in prison as the punishment. And while that is not a particularly effective means of punishment, probably I don't have a better thing to offer at the moment. When you have somebody that is mentally unstable, deranged, or what have you, should they belong in a population of other people that we would consider that, you know, these people, once they endure their time out, they will have supposedly learned their lesson and then not be so bad. I know what the statistics are against this, but some people do come out of prison and never go back. We don't want to put, you know, completely insane people along with completely sane people who are trying to, you know, live out their punishment and then get back to real life. There needs to be some sense applied to this.
I'm not suggesting that you let people roam free. Again, what I'm against is sort of harshness of punishment. Once you've got someone quarantined.
Well, tell us, Oliver. Let's take a specific. See if we can put some flesh on the bones, so to speak. You've got a psychopath who has a propensity to kill people. It's not beneficial for society, as you say. I think you accept there's got to be some sort of control over them. Apart from incarceration, what other options are you offering or suggesting?
I am not, like I said, I'm all for incarceration. I'm just saying that the conditions needn't be so harsh. In right. terms of a psychopath, you can't.
I think we agree. I think we agree on that. He wants fair and just, humane conditions for prisoners, and so do I.
As do I. So we're all
not
agreeing
me.
with that.
I say throw them in a pit and feed them every day.
With wild dogs.
I want to also add that, like Aaron, I'm perhaps more so, utterly opposed to the death penalty. The only justification for the death penalty is some form of retribution, which I don't think is an admirable trait. So far as any attempts can be made to argue that it prevents crime, it is an absolute nonsense. It's a non-starter. Every single stat will go against you if you try and argue that. So the only justification for it, as I say, is retribution, which is...
Yeah, and I want to add something to that. Because I used to believe in the death penalty. I used to believe in the death penalty for vengeful purposes. And it was when I realized how ineffective the death penalty is at deterring crime that I realized, yeah, you're actually worse off. What do people do when they go to life imprisonment? What's the first thing they try to do? Kill themselves so they can get out of the life sentence. Well, if you're going to kill them for them, then you're defeating your own purpose. I used to wonder why it is that somebody that would murder their own children, why are we still feeding that person lunch and keeping them alive? If they're prisoners, we can at least study what went wrong in their head. But if we just kill them, then I don't think justice has been done.
Concordance disagrees with all of us, apparently, so concordance.
Well, you're making everyone a victim of circumstance. Right? You're saying no one's accountable for anything that they do?
No.
I have a hard time...
Tonk, not one of us has said that.
Well,
no.
I haven't said that, but it is the case. I mean, I'll accept accountability as a tool to try and manipulate and shame people out of doing what they're doing, but it's not actually what I believe.
I have to
No, I
say
don't.
that is probably the first time ever that I've had a serious disagreement with concordance, whether on this show or in private conversations with him. Concordance, none of us ever said that. What are you talking about?
No, that's exactly what your Oliver is arguing for here, is that every decision is a consequence of what came before it, and so no one truly makes any choices, right? Or they didn't have any freedom to make any choices, therefore they should not be held liable. And I think I'm representing you fairly here, Oliver. Yes?
You can hold them liable as a tool to try and manipulate them into doing better and shame them, but it's not really what I think. No.
So people make choices. I mean, they clearly make choices, whether they're free or not. We have to pretend as though they are, and I think that's very much what A.C. Grayling was trying to convey, is we have to hold people accountable for their decisions, and we have to live our lives as though we were in control of them.
And as I say, we've got no choice but to do that. But it's a slightly sarcastic point, but it follows. If we have no free will, can we hold people accountable for their bad actions? As I said, if there's no free will, if they didn't have the free will not to do it, we've not got the free will not to judge them, if you see what I mean. I think, as I say, you're right, A.C. Grayling's approach is the only sensible one to adopt. I agree with that.
Well, even if we don't know the answer, then the most conservative way to deal with the problem is that each person must act as though they are responsible. And in society, we hold each person responsible for the outcomes of their actions. We don't blame circumstance, except in some rare cases. Of course, everyone who has ever stolen a car has done it for some reason. They don't usually, even if the reason is they're young and stupid. Everyone does something for a reason, but we still have prohibitions on these things, and we do judge people for doing things for the wrong reasons. Even if they didn't have much of a choice in the matter, they're still going along with the program. They are still part of that program, and the end point of that program does need to be punitive. And we hope that has an influence on others' actions, even though they don't have choices. That's part of the program that we're all interacting with. It's the difference between a passive program and being an active agent in the program, steering it.
Right. I agree with this up to, say, disciplining children in an attempt to try and coerce them into behaving the way you want them to behave. At some point, this becomes futile. When you get to the point of prisoners, and you continue to punish them as if their actions were free, and therefore, because they had the choice to do it, they deserve to be punished for their actions. Their actions are a product, very often with violent criminals. They've felt nothing but harshness and have been in very bad conditions, and so to keep punishing them, that's all they've ever known, and they've given up on themselves. I think there comes a point when we should start putting them in harsh conditions in prison and really be looking at why it is that they got this way, and to try and show them the love and affection that they didn't have, in the hope that you can turn them around in a different way. And that's when I would
that's not consistent with your own position, though, Oliver. If they lack free will, then even the positive things you do are not free choices. Even if they make positive choices, they're compelled to do so by whatever modification. I mean, if you imagine a world full of droids or robots, right? And we say some of the robots are broken, and therefore we should take them and put them in a shop and tinker in their CPUs and change the way they perceive the world. You end up with how easy it would be to go down the line of treating people as robots, not capable of at least pseudo free will, some sort of a perceived free will, choice making.
Yeah, and I have to add also that when you talk about offering somebody love and affection in prison, it conjures a completely wrong image in my mind.
Well, think of Clockwork Orange.
Aaron.
Think of Clockwork Orange. I mean, that was basically the thinking of the scientists who were going to fix what's his name, the main character.
Alec.
Alec.
I
they were
absolutely
going to
love that
fix
movie.
him. Through classical conditioning. They were treating him as a broken robot, and I think there's some danger there. The ethical standard that it sets is somewhat dangerous. And again, I think this is what A.C. Grayling is sort of hinting at: is personal responsibility as the foundation of ethics.
Well, I disagree. I disagree with that.
It has to be, and this is what I'm
No,
frustrated about. No, please let me finish. If in every criminal case the defendant could say, I'm not guilty by reason of the fact I have no free will, then society would very quickly plummet into anarchy. I mean, It's a nonsense to suggest you can't assume that people do have free will. And that, as I say, in concordance, is what Grayling's getting at. You can't excuse people on the basis that they may not have had any choice in the matter.
Well, I'm not suggesting you excuse them from a prison sentence. I'd say sentence them on the basis that they are a danger to society, not on the accountability.
I'm sorry, but this is a nonsense, because you keep on going on about danger to society. What about crimes that don't actually have such an adverse effect, such that they are a danger to other people?
Before we get off on that,
or something like that, you can't say that every time that they appear, well, I didn't harm humanity, so I've got no free will, so therefore let me off. Oh yes, as a judge, that's not a problem.
Then
we also have to remember. Hold on a second. When I am arrested for something that I do, I hope that I am going to be treated that I am responsible for what I did, that I had a choice, and regardless whether I was if I was drinking and driving, for example, that's my responsibility, free will or no. And whether I'm drunk or not, obviously you could argue that, well, he was drunk, he didn't know what he was doing. It doesn't make any difference. There's no excuse as far as the law is concerned. I have to be held accountable. I need to be treated as if I had the free will and the responsibility of my own decisions.
Aaron, you said when I am arrested. Are you arrested on a regular basis? Is this an ongoing thing?
No.
You have the look.
Yeah, I get profiled a lot.
I have to say, I think that despite attempts to find differences, I think we're all pretty much on the same page here, but maybe not. But anyway, on that note, Oliver, I'm going to move on to our next caller, but thank you very much indeed. You've raised some interesting exchanges between us. Aaron, as I'm bringing the next caller, do you want to explain what's happening next Saturday? And
next Saturday, a week from today. I don't know what you might be thinking of. The only thing I had...
The Magic Sandwich Show, the one-off special with you and Concordance Live.
Oh, that's not next Saturday. That's 2 weeks from now.
I'm sorry, 2 weeks.
Yeah. 1 week from now, here in Dallas, Texas, is as I understand it, is a YouTubers gathering. And I think that's all being arranged on Facebook. 2 weeks from now, we have the Texas Free Thought Convention, which the convention part of it is going to be held in the Sheridan Hotel. Other parts of it are going to be intermixed with Richard Dawkins' rally on the steps of the state capitol. I am proud to say that I'm going to be beginning that at 10 a.m. with a simple 10-minute speech. Following me will be Matt Dillahunty of the Atheist Experience, Senator Sean Faircloth, the director for the Richard Dawkins Foundation, Elizabeth Cromwell, and, of course, Richard Dawkins himself. So he and I will share a stage once again. That's going to be in Austin, Texas, on the steps of the Capitol on October 20th.
And I think you're also recording Magic Sandwich Show. It won't be broadcast live. You're recording it, and it's going to involve you and Concordance.
That is correct. We're going to be doing that.
And is Concordance going to appear on stage with a dinosaur's costume on, or is he going to show his face?
This isn't a costume. This is what I really look like. I'm going to wear my human avatar costume.
Okay.
He's a little chubby in the middle. He's got the sort of dark hairs receding a little bit back on his forehead. Yeah.
Yeah, and a week after that, I'm going to be at Reason on the Rock October 27th, that weekend, I will be in Little Rock, Arkansas for an event called Reason on the Rock, and I will be joined by Seth Andrews of The Thinking Atheist. I'm looking forward to that as well. And then the
I
weekend
really
after
enjoyed
that...
meeting Seth at DC.
Yes, he's
I
a
don't want to
great
big him
guy.
up too much, but I do like Seth. Do you want to mute Blog TV? CYGX-1.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No,
Is that
it's not a
Cygnus
problem.
X1? Is that a reference to the black hole?
Yes, it is.
Ah, very nice. Good science reference.
Yeah.
Sorry
So-
about getting you in. It's just a new system we're trying to, which supposedly makes the call quality better and the recording better.
Sure.
But obviously we've got a few issues to deal with, so I apologise about that. How can we help you?
Okay, so I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the Cascadia movement
No, I'm not.
in the Pacific Northwest.
Tell us about it.
So this is kind of tying in with what you guys were talking about, like the vast differences between like red and blue states. So it's a movement based in the Pacific Northwest, and the idea is that if we essentially designed governing based on like bioregionalism in like smaller areas, that we would do better. And some people think of this as like, more akin to like, designating states issues. Other people take it more to be like, we should secede and form our own country. And so I just wanted to see what you guys thought about something like that. Like, is the U.S. too big and too divided to function well? Or are the benefits we get from being a large, diverse nation outweighing anything we would gain from having more of a smaller governance?
I don't believe that we need to be a smaller country or a further subdivided country. I am losing rapidly as I age my love of nationalism. While I love the country that I was born into, and I want the very best for the place that I live. I look at other governments that are equally large as ours, China and Russia, and I see the problems that either of them have. I see advantages too, but I don't see there being an advantage to subdividing. The way that I see the U.S. government is like this. I see that we are, in many ways, what England used to be. 100 years or so ago, and for a long time prior to that, the United Kingdom or England at that time was one of the most ethnocentric world powers that there was, and they were very full of themselves. And they had an attitude of arrogance that is very much similar to what the United States still perpetuates today. England has, or the UK now, has matured, I think. And I like to think that the United States will get there, that we will achieve a level of diversity and tolerance and education and understanding that the United Kingdom is currently at. And that we'll concede, that we'll proceed, of course, from there.
Concordance.
You're talking to two Texans. Texas was at one point its own country prior to joining the Union, and there are a number of groups who still maintain that Texas never truly joined the United States. So they are actual secessionists still in modern Texas, to the point where our governor can make a reference to, if Obama is elected, that Texas will secede. And no one, a lot of people groaned and did the facepalm, but a lot of people actually thought he was being very serious, that it was a legitimate threat. And Texas internally often has discussions about what it would have been like if we had never joined the Union. Of course, we never would have made it, but the idea of secessionism or small regionalism or bioregionalism, as Cascadia is based on, would probably separate Texas, actually, because we're so many different regions. I don't think it's productive. And in fact, I think we need to go sort of the opposite direction. We need to start thinking of ourselves more as a global group, and start to think, rather than regionally, start to think more globally.
Well, then, concordance, when you start trying to think globally, then you start trying to think about the one world order and everything else that people that live in single wide trailers have a tendency to be afraid of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's also the beginning of the end times. So that would bring the fundamentalist, what are they called, the apocalyptic Christians out of the woodworks. Then we'll have to put a chip in everyone's hand. Yeah, no, I really think if we started to think about Africa as, say, our neighbor instead of some distant place, the country of Africa, as Harab would say, as some sort of a neighbor and our cousins and people that we should worry about, rather than sort of the xenophobic other that we can't bring ourselves to care about, then this regionalism seems to be sort of a trend in the wrong direction. Well, as long as Cascadia is okay, screw the rest of the country. We'll segregate. We'll have decent laws and policies here. We'll make all the other people move somewhere else. I think that's entirely the wrong idea. We need to come together and solve what is a mutual problem. This lifeboat that we're all living on is equally accessible to everyone. If you dump pollution in Arizona, it's going to affect someone in China ultimately.
Now,
if we don't deal with the global problems.
You start talking with globalism, and then you get into, as I said, the one world order. When you start talking about environmentalism, then you want to hold us responsible for our addiction to the oil industry. And so when we have to worry about how much trash we generate or how much damage we do to the environment, then you're limiting us to where we can't just live in the now and enjoy the way that things are right now, that we actually have to pretend that there's a future that we are destroying for our grandchildren. And so we have to come up with something like the end time so that we can absolve ourselves of these responsibilities and pretend that it doesn't matter what else we do to this world, that we're not going to be held accountable for it because Jesus is going to come back and roast everything anyway.
Yeah. Succinctly put, Reverend. Or pastor. You're more of a pastor type.
No, I'm a minister, actually. I am reverend.
Let's go back to our caller.
So, keeping on the environment point, do you think religion is the biggest obstacle to the lack of, I guess you could say, environmental progress, or are there other angles we should be tackling that from? Because, we're making progress in certain areas. I don't know if you're familiar with the Elwha River Dam, which we just started removing here, which is the largest dam removal project in history, which is good, but do you want
to tell us a bit about that? Because I imagine, certainly I'm not aware of it, and I suspect some of the audience are not either. Tell us about that.
Sure. So the Elwha River is like one of the main large rivers that runs from the Olympic Mountains and feeds into the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And they put a dam in it, or a couple dams on it, early in the 1900s. I don't know the exact date. And it ended up killing or blocking off an entire distinct subspecies of salmon that could no longer get past the dams. It also caused a bunch of other problems. And I think it was, again, I'm not 100% on this, but I think it was sometime during the Clinton administration that we finally got some stuff passed to start a removal project. Because, there were complaints among the native peoples who have fishing rights, the fact that it wasn't really generating much energy anyway, and it's not like the resultant bodies of water was forming or used for commerce, like some of the Snake River dams are. And so it was just last year that we started tearing it down. And people have been working for several years growing the native plants in greenhouses to transplant into the old lake bed to kind of help progress. And hopefully in the next couple of years, we're going to have salmon returning to the river.
Okay, concordance.
Does anyone know who the top polluting country is in the world? Anyone want to guess?
Your audio broke up, but the top polluting country, I'm pretty certain, must be the United States.
It's actually China. China topped us for the first time, I believe it was 3 years ago. So they're producing more total pollutions, point source pollution. Who regulates China? How's the environmental movement in China? Who's going over there to picket the heaviest polluters? Who are the watchdog groups in China? It's all nationalized. So when you talk about regionalization, and we're talking specifically about environmental issues, you could certainly do a marvelous job, and I think that's a wonderful thing to start in your backyard. And those are things that affect you personally. But it would I think be also important to have globalization where there is some sort of agency that China must answer to in some way, or that can exert some pressure on China. And that's more about what I think the trend needs to be. We need a stronger global government if we're all affecting each other. Here we are on the internet, and suddenly you've got countries like Pakistan that will turn the tap off if something offends them culturally. Mm-hmm. That's the wrong kind of regionalism. China has every vested interest in polluting and developing because it means more wealth for their citizenry and more power for them in the geopolitical stage. The U.S., of course, is a nation of haves. We all have all this amazing power. We consume this unbelievable amount of resource, but we're not answerable to anybody. There's no one that can tell the U.S. government not to do X or Y. And I think there's more of a need for that than maybe there is a need for smaller units of government who are not answerable to anyone. How do we get on politics?
We always end up on politics.
So how do you convince people that is like a worthwhile thing to go after? Because obviously just telling them like, look, this affects you and everyone else doesn't always come across.
Well, here in Texas, where we have this religious inundation, as I said earlier in the show, a large reason that people hold to religion is because it does absolve them from responsibility, particularly where it concerns the environment and a number of other things. I mean, when you talk about, you mentioned earlier whether religion is the problem. Religion isn't necessarily the problem. Religion is a tool that is being used by the problem. I mean, people who don't want to be responsible for their own actions, but want to wreak great harm, who want an excuse for their misogyny or for their racism or for their whatever other hate groups they want to side with, they use religion as the means to that end. Religion has always been a means of manipulation of the masses, and it's a way of evoking power and control, political power particularly, and financial gain certainly. And these people are not being held accountable by anything because they're claiming a higher power that doesn't actually exist.
Right now, relationships between nations are enforced by treaties, which are sort of a fiat agreement. Everybody agrees, if I do X, you will do Y. And that's the rule of reciprocity is what governs trade between nations. But there's always the tension because none of them have anyone that they answer to other than each other. It's five men with guns locked in a room trying to negotiate who's the king. Everybody has a gun. And it's seen very clearly in cases where, let's say, I'll give you something from my own personal experience. The Rio Grande is the border between Texas and Mexico. A lot of Texas-based companies simply moved to the other side of the river so that they would have fewer restrictions on dumping waste into the shared waterway. Well, that water flows over Mexican fields and American fields just as easily. So someone dumping on one side is subject to Mexican law but affects Americans, right? And that kind of situation is very complicated. There are treaties. There's a watershed treaty between the two countries on the shared waterway. But they're constantly violating it because who answers? Who does the polluter answer to? Well, the Mexican government. Well, that can very easily be taken care of. What impetus does the Mexican government have to avoid corruption? Right? It's that's our problem. Our problem is not that we've gotten too big. The problem is we're still too small. We're still thinking about us versus them. And until eventually, and yes, it's utopian in principle, but until we start to think about just us, all of us, these kinds of global problems, where I pollute in my backyard and it ends up in your front yard, we're not going to be able to solve these problems. And they're coming. They're coming in the form of antibiotic resistance. They're coming in the form of monocropping and the collapse of our cropping system, the collapse of our economy. All of these things are possibilities if we don't get together and cooperate to the point where we can avoid these catastrophes. And if there's one thing we're not terribly good at, when everybody has a gun, cooperation doesn't always happen. Sometimes you just get 4 dead bodies and one guy walking out the room.
Yeah, and with religion, as I said, they're using this as a means of absolving themselves of responsibility, of promoting their own, reactionary attitudes, and they're not going to find a resolution to real world problems because they're determined to deny that these problems even exist. And that's the sad thing. It's a reality that it's going to be harsh answers. And that's the real thing. I mean, when you have an overpopulated planet, if we're not extremely efficient, and we're not, then the only other option is to reduce the population. So we either have to get more efficient than we're prepared to do, or we have to mandate restricted breeding, which of course everybody else is opposed to as well. I'm sorry, when it gets to 7 billion people and we're driving SUVs, with the gas guzzling SUV with the wet bar, which is what Ann Coulter says is the biblical way, then we are being wholly irresponsible in our stewardship of the planet and of our neighbors. And it is, as Concordance put it, it is a lifeboat. That's really kind of the way we need to start looking at it.
Just help me with this. The climate change deniers in America, are they on the whole religious?
Yes.
It's an official platform now of the Discovery Institute.
Yes. And it is also, it has become, by necessity, because of that very reason, it has become the counterposition of the National Center for Science Education. So the same people that were opposed to the Discovery Institute for their stance on creationism are now opposed to them for their stance on environmentalism. I tell you, the religious movement only wants to deny their own accountability while projecting that very failure onto those who don't believe in them.
On that bombshell, I'm going to bring the program to a close. Thank you very much indeed for your call.